Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. We have a really interesting panel discussion. The last month or two, I've been bumping into people at various conferences and trade shows and talking to them about test automation. And people have very different opinions about what it can do and what its value is. And so I thought it'd be fun to put together a panel discussion and chat about that. So before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to do some introductions. So Roya, will you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Roya Montezeri. I'm a Senior Director of Quality at Fox Auto. I am part of a bigger organization where I own and manage a system team, including testing, DevOps, and Tech Hub and operational aspect.
All right, thanks. Hey, Daniel, you want to?
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Daniel Garay, I'm Director of QA here at Parasoft. Been the director for about 8 years now, in the industry for about 15. QA is one of my passions. I've been in this industry. I love it. And yeah, I mean, it's what I do. It's what I enjoy.
All right, thanks, Daniel. Nathan?
Hi, I'm Nathan Jakubiak. I'm Senior Director of Development at Parasoft. I actually started my career at Parasoft, at least in the software space, as a junior engineer, and I've slowly developed and grown, lead teams, and now I lead leaders who lead teams. And along the way, we've built solutions for automated testing, but we've also done a lot of automated testing, and we've also done it wrong. So I've seen a lot of good and bad things throughout my 22 years here now. So
thanks. And I'm Arthur Hicken. I'm the Parasoft evangelist. I'm also known as the Code Curmudgeon if you follow me on social media platforms. And I'm passionate about testing and process and quality and safety and security and things like that. So I think this is really fun. So our first question today that I'm going to ask you guys to answer is, does automation really pay for itself? And why do some people say that it doesn't? So anybody want to go first? Anybody bold?
I can start. I think the question, I can start. I think it is truly an interesting question because if you think about it, with the speed of anybody who has anything in e-commerce, how fast changes come, and what's the expectation of our market, and at least in my space, there is a tremendous amount of data that's being communicated through application to our backend server. And the complexity of an enterprise that contains so many integration points and the promise of DevOps, if you put all these factors together and ask yourself, how successful can I be without an automation? I just think that very quickly you come to a conclusion that is almost impossible. So, however, automation has different levels, right? So some people will go in and say, hey, my unit and component, they're all automated. Do I really need to invest anything on UI automation? So it just opens up the question little by little, where do you want to spend your time? And would it pay for itself? It is all about your business, any business right now that has a client, consumer, they need to respond with the speed of market. And without automation, there is almost close to zero possibility of success. So I think if we break the question into the layers of where are we talking about and where do you want to spend your time and money, you may find different answer on the different level, but automation as a whole is not negotiable. That's my stat.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with her in the sense that, when you talk about automation, you're talking about, okay, you got to invest some, you got to invest in man hours, and you got to invest maybe in the tools that you're doing, right? And people may look at that, well, from a short perspective, short view, it's like, okay, well, you have that, but you're comparing the cost for man hours and tools compared to the quality of that'll improve with automation, right? Automation will help improve the quality, and you can't really measure. You can't put a cost, in my opinion, on quality. The only way to do that is from a customer base. Your customers will look at it, and if from a quality standpoint, if they don't, obviously, if they don't like the software, if they're not, I shouldn't say like it, if they continue to find high severity issues in your products, then they're going to go elsewhere when it's time to renew the license, right? So, I mean, automation helps with your quality. I mean, it helps increase your coverage of testing. I mean, you go on and on the different benefits of automation, and it's just that you can't really put an immediate cost on that.
So I'm thinking about it's a silly story, but when I first learned the value of automated tests much earlier, somewhere between 15, 20 years ago, some of our practices were not as good as we would like. And so, we would write automated tests, but it wasn't like a standardized practice, and it wasn't, it was inconsistent, I guess we would say. And so at that point, I was a developer on the team. I fixed a bug and, went on the way. I didn't write a test for it. That was my mistake. And I want to say it was something like 9 months later, we got a bug report came in. I don't remember if it was from a customer, it probably was. And I start working on it and I go, wait, I fixed this problem. And I went and I looked back and like, oh, wait, yeah, I did fix it. And I didn't write a test for it. And that was the point that cemented in my mind, wait a minute, I need to be writing tests for everything. Whenever I fix something, I need to be writing a test. And that was just the beginning. I mean, at that point, it was a unit test that I was writing. But it's sort of, when you have the automation that you can prevent errors from coming back or from showing up, it's sort of like, in my mind, it's kind of silly not to use them, right? Because I don't want to be, as a developer, I don't want to be fixing things I already fixed. And obviously, as Daniel talked about, we don't want our customers dealing with the problems that we put into the software because we're not following good practices that with tools that are actually, getting easier and easier to use. So,
yeah, I think as a consumer, I'm not happy with vendors who treat me as their beta testing team. And it's funny because as a tech person, you think I'd be the guy who wants to play with all the newest, latest grits. You know what? Like I want stuff that works.
Yeah.
And the only way to keep
I
up
think
is
you and everybody else, right? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, there's nothing more frustrating than you're in the middle of using whatever software you're using, and it either just stops working, it crashes. I mean, thank God we don't have the blue screen of death anymore in Windows, right? Because that was just so frustrating back in the day. Obviously, quality has improved greatly over the years, whether whatever company you come from, but yeah, from a quality standpoint, I mean, that's just the most frustrating thing. I mean, when you're dealing with any application.
So I want to remind the audience at this point that we will take like your questions and try to work them in if they're relevant. So if you hit that little question mark box up at the top, I never know if I'm supposed to point this way or that way, but you can put in a question live and we'll try to incorporate it. Also, if you look partway down that list on the right, there's a little well, it's a paper clip, right? It may or may not look like a paper clip to you, but it looks like Clippy. And if you click that, we actually have some, like documentation about some things about automation for you that you can download as well. So just to remember that that's there. And of course, there'll be a recording that people can watch later. So just to remind you. So, Roy, I thought it was kind of interesting because I started the question, is automation worth it? And you kind of flipped it on its head and said, can you afford to live without automation? Is that what you were trying to say?
Absolutely. I think the question itself, again, I go in breaking it into the little bit of pieces. So automation as a traditional automation, at least in my space. If you're a small company and you're venture capital, you may say, hey, I can live without automation by doing my unit or component and test within my development and whatever is available to me, and get your POC and your first version of product out and still survive, right? But when you talk about enterprise level or products that have 99.97 availability metrics around them, then the question becomes, what's your discipline to make sure the process repeats and the test repeats? So if you break the question into the pieces, in my opinion, maybe the question should be, where do you want to put most of your effort, energy in tooling for automation? Of course, all of us want to shift left, right? But the reality is, and I'm telling you, the reality is that there are tests that needs to happen in right. And if you miss those tests, your availability, the metrics that's important to your business cannot be satisfied. So I am basically saying, maybe if you break the question, is that where does automation pay the most is something that we need to discuss. Maybe those who think that automation may not pay for itself, maybe there is a lot of shift right automation, and I'm just guessing. But at the end of the day, if you break it into all the different type of tests we do, and in every level, without it, you won't be successful.
Well, I'm wondering about cases where people think it's not worth it. I think traditionally might come from UI testing, because UI testing is hard to automate in a stable, maintainable fashion, right? You can, maybe writing an initial script is easy, but getting it so that it passes successfully and you're not constantly triaging it is hard. And in fact, I mean, we have UI tests today, right, on some of our stuff. And there's one framework in particular, I won't mention the name, but we use it. It's an external tool for testing our JTest product in IntelliJ. And IntelliJ is its own complicated beast, which I think complicates it. But, we've struggled. We've spent hours and hours on that automation. And we started asking ourselves, well, is this should we just drop it? Like, we're spending so much time. But here's the problem. Even with all the time we were spending, we were still, sometimes it was finding real issues. And so, we investigated other frameworks, and in the end, we actually found a way to stabilize it. And so now it's, we're not spending as much time on it. But I think for us, there was a real tension because we were spending so much time on it. But in the end, we still couldn't get ourselves to drop it because it was finding real problems that we don't want our customers to find. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the balance, right? It's finding that balance between, how much time do I spend trying to get this audit, this test, this, UI, for the example you're using, Nathan, it's the UI test, right? And maybe, doing an alternative. So you have to just try to find a balance there and to try to move forward. But like you said, it was coming back and it was giving us results that we wanted. So where do you kind of find the balance on that? That's difficult.
I think I think I would say that for a team that asking a question, does automation pay for itself? One thing that helped us is to understand the cost of a defect, right? Remember, quality is subjective. And when we talk about quality and the question of, does automation pay? I would again break it into what layer we are talking about. And then I would recommend figure out your cost of defect. This has really helped us to say, where do we want to invest? Our relationship, Cox Auto relationship with Parasoft virtualization, it started from that question. So I can tell you that story, where if you have escaped defect, what is the cost of getting the defect from client? What is the cost of how many hours you're spending to triage it? What is the cost of finding hard issues that may end up being after integration? it's not a science. It's not all like dollars that you have 100% accuracy to it, but you do have effort estimate. And if you start putting those effort estimate together, you can clearly see, for us, it was clearly that we need earlier integration testing with our endpoint. And that virtualization helped us to achieve that. Now, we can actually go back and say, by doing that, this type of issues become less. So one is client satisfaction, right? That every company does and every company measures. What is our, a scorecard with our client? Who are our promoters? When we started, we didn't have that many happy clients because our rate of defect was high. I'm talking about many years past. But today, because we invested in combination of tools, strategies. It wasn't one thing, but we pulled all of it together to say, so how do you reduce your cost of the defect? And then it turns, as you get better, they become reduce the churn and reduce the number of the touch point. So if you are one of those organizations that needs to think about, does automation pay off, or the cost of automation pay off, I would encourage you to look at your defects. If you're one of those that have zero defect, then maybe you have less, right? Less investment to do in this area. But I'm sure if you have zero defect, you're already automating. I can bet you on it that you're already automating if you have zero defect. So
I think it's interesting, Roy, because you again, like, you've redirected the focus, right? The question isn't really, or the goal isn't test automation. That's no organization's goal. It's a means to an end. The end being, in your case, you're focused on your customer satisfaction. And to get customer satisfaction, you need uptime. And to get uptime, you need certain amounts of testing. And to accomplish that testing, you need automation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think sometimes being part, I have been in this business for many years, right? And sometimes we forget that you use, similar to development, right? You use a language because that language lends itself to a better product delivery, right? Like you select Java. It's not because you only love Java, because Java maybe helped you to develop faster, create better libraries, as an example. But Java is not what you're selling. You're selling the end result, your product. For testing professionals, and automation is similar. You're testing because the end result is what matters. So I keep focusing on, think of value and what value you're going to get. And then look at, if you want to articulate the cause, look at what's the impact to that value.
I mean, speaking of value and our customer base, right? I've been part of several audits where, big companies, big corporations will come in and they'll audit our software development cycle. They'll look at, okay, how do you actually test your software before we purchase it? So a lot of it is, okay, well, what's your quality standards? What are your criteria for your quality, right? So, I mean, if you go to an auditor, and obviously the auditor is going to go to the customer that's hiring them, right? And you only show them just a few hundred manual tests that covers your quality cycle. I mean, it's going to be hard to sell your product. I mean, from an auditor standpoint, I mean, you got to have better improvements than that, right? You got to have better quality criteria than that. So, I mean, automation is a big part of that, and everybody's touched base on it, from unit test all the way to functional testing and everything in between, component integration testing, whatnot. So, it's an essential part of the software development cycle nowadays, especially now that the tools have become a lot easier to use. It's not so difficult to create. I mean, UI automation tests, obviously they still have their hiccups and they're difficult to maintain. But obviously, if you want to cover functional testing, you have API testing that you could do now. Doesn't necessarily have to be UI. So where there's a means, there's a way to do it. As far as automation, I see here, I think he's coming in. One thing, he touched based on previously, and that he mentioned the fact that every company is a tech company, and I found that really intriguing when he initially said that, because I used to work for a manufacturing company. We sold steel. That's what we did. But they ended up automating the data entry portion of it. So they introduced automation into their company with the data entry, right? So it doesn't matter what type of company you are, you're going to have some kind of tech in there.
Yeah, thanks. So I see here your camera might be turned on, but you're not here. But we have. Can you hear us?
I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you can join in. So yeah, we're just we're talking about automation and what the value of it is, and I think that Daniel just brought up an interesting point, right? He was talking about like how with the latest tools, et cetera, and that's an area I wanted to dive in on a little. Was what's changed? I do feel like 20 years ago, let's say, the automation question was a much bigger question, and I do feel like things have changed. So what do you all think like has changed in the last 5 or 10 years that makes automation so much more powerful or effective?
So since can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, for some reason my video is not working, even though it says it is. So I apologize for that.
That's all right.
It just shows that background. But to answer your question, and by the way, I'm going to jump in here because I came in late here, wrapping up from prior engagements. So to answer your question, what has changed? So I would say that the fundamental thing that has changed is the software delivery or the need for software. Previously, I would say that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, that was way before I started my career. Software was more of passing interest, as in let's explore what this can do for us, right? We are not really interested. But over the course of years, software has become part of every organization, integral part of every organization. It has become that central nervous system. So every organization, regardless of who they are, I would say they are a technology organization. I think that's what I heard, as I joined in the call. And as a result, it has become, how can I get my products out to the market faster? And that has been the key. Added to that, the whole fundamental has changed since we adopted Agile, right? Agile delivery process has been, let's get to production fast. Agile combined with DevOps has really accelerated that. Let us get out to the market fast as possible. And even to the extent of let us experiment, let us figure out what the customer might be looking for or what they might want, even before they ask us. And so that race has really led to how can we get things to production faster. But at the same time, how can we do it safely? Right? That has been the key. So it is definitely not a question of let's go and break stuff in production, but how can we do it safely? And that has given rise to, okay, what do we need from a technology perspective to accomplish that? Well, you obviously need those virtual environments, you need test automation tools. And I think that has been the cyclic effect. And so I'm going to just pause here because, as you guys know me, I can keep talking. So I'll let others chime in.
Well, I mean, I think to your point, the thing I think you're implicitly saying is, when we had a long release cycles, people could maybe justify having large or long manual test cycles, right? Because they might be releasing once or twice a year. And so I can take a few weeks to do manual testing on an application. But if I'm having to release it, every month, then every week, then every day, then every few hours a day, right? We don't have time to spend manual testers on all these changes. It just doesn't work, right? If we want to get things out to the market faster. So I think that does drive the need for automation as opposed to manual testing, for instance.
Yeah, I think that is it. Partly it's that. I think also, the elephant in the room for test automation is AI now, right? And I'm not talking about testing AI, which is its own nightmare, not the subject for today, but how AI has augmented existing test practices, right, along with this change in DevOps, the frequency of release, etc. So, what are your thoughts on AI and testing? Let's leave it like kind of broad, and then whoever wants to jump in. Roya, you're on mute.
So I would call it is the door to the future. And if you're not open to it, you may miss the what the future will look like. Whether it is again, when you look at it, the data is the driver of how we test or what we test, right? At the end of the day, behind everything there is some data, and I look at it as this may not be as popular approach today, but to address the speed to the market need, we got to look at it from how do we use AI. Even today within our test approach, we look at what is the frequency of data used, what is the frequency of the path that are used. With the new methods of deployment, such as blue, green, and everything, where you actually do use some of your beta clients to do some of the testing in your green environment or blue environment, you want to understand the most path used and use that data for your testing. And I think is somewhere that you need to start thinking of. If I'm going to go fast, I need to understand my data. If I need to understand my data, I need to have some kind of AI that help me to analyze these terabytes, gigaterabytes of data. And from that perspective, I am certain that our future of testing is something we will.
Yeah, I think about the fact like AI affects a
Nathan, you're
lot of-
muted.
No,
No, I think, yeah,
Oh.
we can hear you.
I'm good, yeah. It affects different aspects of it. So I'm thinking, some of the things that we create at Parasoft, for instance, there's the creation aspect, right? So tools make it easier just to create automated scripts now. For instance, creation of API test scenarios from recording API traffic that happens between a front end and a back end, for instance, right? And being able to put those together and pass, automatically figure out what data is passing between requests and responses and stitching that together. Like writing a scenario like that by hand takes a long time. But if you have a intelligent automated AI system that knows how to identify those patterns and put it together for you in a tool, it saves you a lot of time, right? So, there's tools that'll help you with the creation aspect. But then, going to, we were earlier talking about UI testing, when tests break, there's now a lot of technology out there that helps you with self-healing, right? Healing the test scenarios when they break and identifying, okay, well, maybe you're identifying an element this way, but you could try doing it that way, which is another thing that we do at Parasoft. So, I think the tools are getting a lot better at helping save a lot of time. And I think time is where, people start questioning the value of automation, right? So the tools are the AI and the intelligence is helping cut down on a lot of the things that cause people to spend a lot of time, right? So there's still time you spend, but it's reducing it.
And I feel like there's this expectation, like, why did I get AI? What was my point behind it? And I feel like sometimes people think that the main pitch behind AI and testing is to reduce body count, but I see it as enabling people to get their job done, like just literally being able to finish the task. you know, we constantly hear, and Nathan, I know you've heard this all the time, you know, from people is you know, having something that's untestable, or the dirty secret that someone will tell us, like on a phone call, but not in public, that, you know, we test in production because we have no way of testing ahead of time, right? Like how automation lets people see, everybody's laughing, right? Like none of us will admit to it, right? But getting testing actually finished, like to me, my expectation for AI is that initially it takes on my tedious, boring tasks. And so I don't see it as a challenge as a tester, that it's coming for my job. I see that it's coming to take away the annoying parts of my job so that I can focus on the things that, you know, the human brain still is very exceptional at. How the rest of you feel about like AI?
I mean, I think you have to embrace, you know, technology. I mean, the field that we are in, it's dynamic. It's constantly changing, right? I mean, one of the reasons I went into this field is because of that. I didn't want to be in a field where it's just static and you're doing a lot of things on a daily basis redundantly, right? So AI is one of those things that it's coming into play, and you know, I don't. I think, you know, if you look the other way, that's you know, that's not right. I think you got to embrace these changes, and learn about them, right? Not just ignore them. Don't just kind of you know, look the other way. And if you could leverage it, then definitely leverage it, because I mean I mean our field is constantly changing. If you're not adapting, if you're not learning something new, you're falling behind. And if you're falling behind, then you're falling behind your competitors, right? So I constantly say that to my engineers, you know, as individuals, you know, we need to learn, you know, we need to have goals to try to learn something new every year, because if we don't, we're falling behind the curve as a department, and as a department, we're falling behind the curve as a company. So you have to embrace all these new technologies.
Yeah. So since I didn't speak on this topic, I'll go ahead and chime in. So I'm assuming AI in this context is more of you know, letting a bot in and let it figure out what testing it needs to do, and you know, go ahead and do the testing, right? And the assumption is there are scripts that are already created. Test automation is already been created. So this is, I assume, the AI we are talking about is a step above, which is actually doing the discovery and doing the testing, figuring things out. And I completely agree. You know, as we progress, as we explore, so this I look at as climbing on top of a pyramid, right? We are constantly going to keep climbing on top of a pyramid to reach the tip, and the tip is going to keep rising, right? And we use technology to get all the mundane tasks done, so that, you know, that's the whole reason we got technology in the first place, in manufacturing, in services industry, in all the other places, to do things better, to experiment, to get the best products out there. So, you know, this is the step in that direction, testing. So mundane tasks are taken by bots, so to speak, so that we, the individuals, the personnel, I mean, in this case, the QA tester, their skill set has to be elevated to figuring out what is the optimal way to test, and maybe building those bots even, right? So this is essentially moving up the food chain, so to speak.
Yeah, I do think, you know, it's interesting when we think about where AI can help, and we do see it, you know, across the industry in areas of test creation, test execution, test maintenance, self-healing, you know, data isolation, data anonymization, data synthesis to get around privacy and security constraints, especially in particular markets. So I do think that AI can do a lot of interesting things, and how that plays out does depend on where you're sitting in the, you know, the good old-fashioned testing pyramid, right? If you're doing unit testing, it's doing one thing, and if you're doing UI testing, it's maybe something very, very different. But yeah, I think that there's there's lots of little things, and that's why for me the AI isn't the point of the tool. Again, it's like, what is the AI doing to help me get my job done? Is it setting up the mocks and the stubs that I need? Is it creating the initial set of test cases? Is it helping me make the test cases less brittle? Is it helping me expand? My ideal tool takes my existing tests and double my coverage without any more tests, right? Like it's always interesting when you run like real coverage on a test and you find out that you got 17 tests that do the same thing. You really needed to run one of them, right? Like it's just one of those issues is how many tests do I have and how brittle are they and how much time do I spend? So the creation is something that like the tool's always focused on in the beginning, and because it's super important. And I do think that we are starting to see more AI in those areas of maintenance, of self-healing, and especially in the data areas as well, right? Like helping us do intelligent things with data. So we're kind of at the about the end of our time frame. I wanted to give everybody like a minute or two to make a closing statement, just like what you think about the topic. So Daniel, you're like at the top left on my screen at the moment now, so I'm gonna let you go first.
Well, I mean, as far as automation is concerned, I mean, I think we've all touched base. It's an essential part of software development. It's an essential part from a quality standpoint, from where I'm sitting, and from my department. For me, the customer satisfaction outweigh the cost of man hours to maintain, run automation. So, I don't think you could go wrong with adding any type of automation, whether it be unit tests, functional tests, integration tests, whatever it may be.
Thanks.
It's not
Roya,
it's not wasted cost.
Yeah, thanks. Roya, you want to make your closing?
I would say what I said to you before. If anyone out there is thinking, why am I automating, and whether it's worth it or not, I encourage you to look at the value. Ask yourself what value you want to create, whether, reduce refake, whether have a better resilience, whatever that value is. I encourage you to look at that. And I would say this about AI, whether software or data or anything else, eventually will catch up to us the same way cloud did, the same way virtualization did. So you want to be upfront in front of it rather than behind it.
All right. Hirikant, you got a closing statement?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you for inviting me here. So I would say that any organization, any industry needs to be innovating constantly. Constant innovation is the only way to survive, right? It is the survival of the fittest. And in order to innovate, you need to be able to figure out what works, what does not work, and have the ability to experiment, get feedback from the market, and do what you need to do. And that kind of drives the need for using technology to help with that. And that is where automation comes into play, right? Automation, I believe, are the brakes that allow you to speed up and go to the market. So without the brakes, it's just like you would not drive a vehicle without the brakes. And automation, I think, in that sense, are the brakes that allow you to go faster and do things safely within an accepted risk parameter, and do whatever experimentation you need to do so that you can innovate and you can survive. So I would say it's an integral part of what is needed for survival for organization. Thank you. Back to you.
Thanks. Nathan, you got a closing thoughts?
Yeah, I have a little bit of the same thought or position as Roya in terms of I can't imagine not doing test automation. It seems like, I mean, there is some cost, but once you have it running stably, the cost is pretty low and the benefit is extremely high. The number of issues that we find before our customers using automation, I just can't imagine not doing it. So for me, it's like a no-brainer. And I mean, even when we were preparing for this webinar, I asked Arthur, like, you mean people are still asking that question? Because to me, it's like so obvious that we need to do it. That being said, one thing when I think of automation, we're constantly asking ourselves, what level should we automate at? And we haven't really touched on test pyramid too much today, but to me, you automate, you pick the right levels to automate based on what you're testing and what your needs are, and you don't do blind automation, because I think blind automation does lead you into some traps. So, not everything should be a UI test. We try to optimize, like, let's pick just the right things. If it's backend logic, it shouldn't be in the UI test. So that should be maybe at an API test, or even better at a unit test, right? And so you try to figure out, you need to optimize your return. So you're building the right kind of tests at the right level so that you get the most return on it, and you're not, you remove the diminishing returns where you spend a lot of time for little value. And so I think for me, that's a very important thing to consider when you're doing test automation. But
I think that was like a common refrain here, right? That it's not about saying, hey, I'm going to go automate everything I'm doing. It's like, what can I pick off, right? Something that I can quantify. Now I can justify it, right? Put some effort into it, see some result, and then what else can I pick off next? All right. So thanks everybody for joining. It's an intriguing conversation. I'm going to be doing more of these in the future on some other topics. So love to hear from you. Those in the audience, again, remember over at the side there's that little paper clip, and if you click it, you can download some documents. If you want to play with some test automation tools and AI tools, we've got a blog over there and a white paper about AI in testing, and you can certainly try our products out and get a demo and play with it yourself if you want to, right? See what it can do for you. And if any of you vehemently disagree that automation is working, shout out on social media or send me an angry email or whatever, right? Like, I'm happy to have that conversation. I think it would be fun. So with that, again, thanks everybody for your time, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.